This is my first time teaching at Fromm. I've taught for 26 years at USF. And so there may be some pedagogical or some other items related to Fromm that you'll teach me about as we sojourn together for the next 2 months. And I look forward to that. I wanted to just say that I have uploaded a syllabus to the course site. And, you know, there are no required assignments in this class, but I did want to go over this just so you could see what I'll be talking about. And if you want, you can read or watch the film if you prefer that over reading the novels. And so I just wanted to take 10 minutes and just sort of organize ourselves around the syllabus and kind of expectations. And then maybe you can guide me in terms of what would be most helpful for you. Okay. So let me, without further ado, I'm going to share my screen. And so let me just start off and say two things. So if you looked at my bio, so I have a doctorate in systematics, and so philosophy of religion is what we call it. And after that, I went back and did advanced coursework in psych. And so I am a psychotherapist and have been in practice now for almost 2 decades. And so I teach at SF State, I teach at Golden Gate University, and then of course, USF is my spiritual home. So in my psychotherapeutic practice, I treat predominantly personality disorders, depression, generalized anxiety, panic, and of course, loss, bereavement. And so those are my primary areas. There are other areas too that I cover, but predominantly that's what my clinical practice consists of. So I'll be pulling from both of those sources as we do our time together today. And the other thing I would just say is, you know, when I am an instructor, you have me for whatever you need. So I'm going to encourage you to reach out to me, email me if you want to set up a time to talk. If I can be of help in any way. I think you saw probably in my bio that I've spent really going on almost 28 years in hospice and palliative care, just as a research focus, also as someone who's worked on Pathways Hospice bereavement team for almost 10 years, and then also at Hospice by the Bay. And as I say, I continue to collaborate with folks on both hospice and palliative care efforts here in the city. So that's also what's informing in part our time together. So without further ado, let me share my screen, and I'm going to just show you a little bit about what we're up to and see if you have any questions. So here you'll see that I've got my USF email address, so use that. I check it routinely, and I'm going to just start off by saying that, you know, this particular class really is doing 3 things. It's taking a novel, coupling that novel with a psychological strategy, a psychological tool, psychological insight and intervention, we call them. And then we're going to finally look at a religion. So we're going to look at a religion, a novel, and a psychological tool or intervention in 3 different times during our course together. So we're going to start with Wise Blood, which is a novel by Flannery O'Connor. And she is writing in the background about Catholicism and what it means to have a sacramental imagination, which I'll talk about later. We will take the psychological prism of what we call the psychodynamic school of psychology. And this is the most popular form of therapy in terms of clinical practice. Most clinicians use psychodynamic tools or approaches in order to get at suffering and to minimize psychic distress. So you'll learn a lot about the psychodynamic school of psychology in this first part of class. And then lastly, we're going to take a look at what exactly is being presented in terms of Catholicism in the novel Wise Blood. So three different sort of areas of attention we will pay. And then in the second part of class, we'll have a new novel. And that will be Go Tell It on the Mountain, James Baldwin's classic. And with that, we're going to use a psychological tool that comes to us from humanism. And the more specific tool, perhaps some of you have heard of this, we're going to look at an abridged version of the Myers-Briggs. And I want to show you how to use that tool so that you can derive strength-based language to talk about differences with your partner, with your kids, with your lover, with your coworkers. And so talking about difference in a constructive way will be a focus. And then last in that particular novel will be a look at Protestantism writ large. And so Baldwin, underneath the surface of the protagonist in this story, John Grimes, is the story of a young adolescent's relationship to God vis-a-vis a Protestant, very sort of rule-based prescription for living fundamentalist school of Protestantism. And it's called the Temple of the Fire Baptized. So we'll look at all three of those dynamics. And then last, we'll conclude wonderfully with Philip Roth. And his Philip Roth is so prolific. And really, if you get into Philip Roth's studies, I mean, really, he's got over 50 novels. And they're all, if you're a fan of Philip Roth, they're all good. But this particular one, American Pastoral, I think is the best. So we're going to look at Philip Roth's American Pastoral, which is our birthright, those of us that live in San Francisco, and even more, those of us that live or are up on the hilltop now, close to Haight-Ashbury, because what that book is really doing is looking at the Berkeley in the 60s student movement around freedom of speech, issues around civil rights, and then finally the protests around the Vietnam War. Those are the three main items that Roth covers in the story, but underneath that is a story about first-generation immigrants, Jewish immigrants. And so Roth is also telling us really important material about what it's like to be a first-generation immigrant, and he wants the reader to reflect on what is, if there is, an American dream. Does that change? Is that available to all? The psychological insight or intervention that we will use to look at this particular story comes from cognitive behavioral therapy. And so we will use a technique called cognitive restructuring, which you can learn in 5 minutes. And once you've mastered it, why it really can take the teeth out of disproportionate emotional responses in the moment. So I want to teach you that technique, and then we'll use it and see if it might help other people in the story. And then last but not least, in Philip Roth, as I've said, is the story of Judaism. And it's a reflection on what does the role of Jewish identity play in the family here, the Lvov family. And so it's an incredible story. It's very voluptuous, the writing. All three really are classics. And so that's kind of how we'll distribute our time. So let me show you how I've got the days set up. And you'll see here that we're sitting on May 2nd, and we're doing our little course introduction. And you can see here, I have required readings. Well, they're really not required. You don't have to read them. These are just the readings that I will be using as source material in the lecture. So these readings here, Blevins, 2 different times, that refers to 2 different PDFs. And so I'll have Scott help me upload those. And so you can have those, or I can send you those as an attachment. But what you will need, if you want to do the readings in the course, you will need the books. So Wise Blood, American Pastoral, and Go Tell It on the Mountain. And I just checked Amazon over the weekend in anticipation of our time together today, this Tuesday, and these are all on sale for used copies. Doesn't matter what edition, get any edition, it's okay. And for under $5 each. So that's good. Last but not least, there's another text. This text is called, and Rob, my friend Rob here, who's part of our Fromm family. Rob knows this book very well. It's Frank Ostachevsky's The 5 Invitations. So this is a text that I think you will really enjoy. I've taught it on the undergraduate level now since it's come out for 7 years. And of the 28 years or so teaching, I've never had student response so positive on a text before. This is a text that is informed, generally speaking, by Buddhism or Buddhist tenets, although the author himself isn't necessarily a Buddhist practitioner in some strict sense, but he is the founder of a hospice, the Zen Hospice Project in San Francisco. And Rob and I know that place very well and have received training there. And in a sense, what Frank Ostaczewski, the author, does is he provides a kind of training manual for what it's like to be in difficult situations. How do we survive them? What does it mean to be a patient? What does it mean to be a caregiver? A caregiver in the 21st century with the technological momentum that we all feel underneath our feet, and the fact that almost so often the care that is delivered is through professional caregivers and not from family and friends as it once was. And so without judgment, but just trying to observe the changes in worlds, or the changes in care, or the changes in disease models. Frank Ostaczewski is writing about change and how to live with change. And so we'll take a look at that book in tandem with Go Tell It on the Mountain, and this is all described in the syllabus. And again, each of the books in this course, if you take a careful look at the screen I'm sharing, I've linked, I wouldn't do this for my undergrads, but I've linked the actual movie to the book here in the syllabus for you, and you can watch the movies for free on YouTube. There will be some commercials, of course. Often people come to me and they say, well, Nate, I'm really into ebooks and audiobooks right now. Is that okay? Absolutely. Audiobooks are wonderful. So if you'd like to engage the texts that we'll be discussing in this class via audiobook or the actual movie, I welcome you to do that. Let me stop right there and just field any questions, and then I want to return to just one last sort of general statement about how we'll spend our time. So any questions about anything I've said so far? So I will teach the novels as if you have at least scanned the Cliff Notes of them. You will need to have a general understanding or a vague sense of what the novel is about, but I'm not going to go deep necessarily into the character explications. I'm going to stay at a higher level, a religious level, and also a level that allows us to use the psychological tools that we're teaching with each novel. And so that will be our primary focus. There won't be deep character sketches or evaluations, although we can have those conversations outside of class if you'd like. So again, you can reach out to me and set that up. So here's the last thing I would just say. When you have a class that's this interdisciplinary, it's really important for me, I've found, to have a very sort of sturdy structure. So the syllabus, as I've got it identified here, is exactly what we will do. I won't get behind or ahead. You can wake up and just take a glance at this and see exactly what we'll be talking about. And if there are additional handouts and other materials, I'll either email them as an attachment to you, or maybe Scott can help me upload those to our course site. But the overarching sort of way in which all of this interdisciplinarity coheres is what I call, and others have called, systems theory. So systems theory is kind of at the heart of evolution, whether we're talking about biological evolution or we're talking about social or cultural sort of manifestation and change in evolution. And what systems theory presents is that we think of ourselves often as automatons, as atomized individuals. And we think of ourselves as having an orbit of control over our lives that allows us to make, quote unquote, our decisions, my own personal decisions. And what systems theory asserts is that what I've just said, which is a very typical kind of American way of going about life, at least historically, is that's exactly ass backwards. What systems theory assumes and asserts is that no one person's behavior can be understood in isolation. It's always in response, consciously or otherwise, to other factors. So multiple causes give rise to the behaviors that we might identify in one individual. So a clinical example from me and my world to emphasize this point would be, so when I have a family that comes in with a child who's having problems at school, those first sessions typically have a cadence to them, and this is how it goes. You have the parents show up in my office and they say, Dr. Nate, we've got a son, and I'm just making up a story here to protect the innocent, but I've got a son, let's say, and he is, we caught him smoking pot after school with his friends about a month ago. And on the weekend, we caught him sneaking out. And then this past week, he hasn't gone to school. And we want you to know, Dr. Nate, that our family is a wonderful family and everybody is getting along perfectly. The only thing, and we can't figure out why, is our son acting out. And if you would just talk to him and set him straight, remind him of how grateful he should be for loving parents and all of the things he's been afforded, why we'd be grateful and would be happy to pay for the session. So, of course, we call this the identified patient. So the son here is the identified patient. And gosh, if this person would just get their stuff together, then the whole family unit would just go back to what? Go back to being in bliss. Well, that's kind of the tacit assumption that I get from a lot of the parents. But of course, I take a systems point of view, which says to me that the child's behavior can't be understood outside of the context of the relationships he's having within that family, even if they don't seem to be very deep or very engaged, this family. They don't need necessarily to spend a lot of time talking in order for the family members to have profound influence on that child. So no one's behavior stands in isolation. It can only be understood through the prism and context, the structures, the multiplicities, the cultural heritages, the ethnicities, and so on and so on and so on that exist in this complicated thing called life. So in this class, what we're going to do is we're going to try and peel back these layers of influence that individuals in the stories carry. And we'll do so with a sense of trying to understand really where the suffering in this particular character is coming from. And then if we were in that person's shoes, what steps we might take to either compassionately support the character in the story, or if that was us, what we would do to improve our own lot in this world moving forward. So I think that the psychology that we go over will have a personal impact. It could have a professional impact on you, but of course it'll have a literary payoff too in the lectures. So let me stop there. This is just sort of splashing around, giving you a tour of the things that we will be talking about. It's not exclusive, but it's or comprehensive rather, but it's. Does that sound okay, Sandy? All right. Good to see you, Linda. And we've got two Lindas, actually, and I remember both Lindas. I think both Lindas came to the presentation that I did. Yes, all right, that's beautiful. So in your classes, and at this point, I would really be grateful for your direction. In your classes, is it the case that most of your instructors use PowerPoint slides? And if so, do you like that? I get cheers and jeers.
I'll comment.
Okay.
When I teach, I use PowerPoint slides. My subject tends to be highly visual, and I think PowerPoint is great as long as it's used to supplement what you're talking about and not just reflect what you're talking about.
Sure. So helpful. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. So visual aids, PowerPoint to help organize thoughts and to help sort of guide and sort of reinforce the structure of the lecture. But maybe if I can fill in some gaps, would it be okay if we do some in-class exercises together? Would that be all right? All right. See, I really want to get you doing the psychological workshop that I put my students through, I'd really like for you to have that experience too. And so a part of me thought that I could split time each Tuesday with an applied piece and then a theoretical piece. And so the theoretical piece I'll use slides for, I'm hearing, but the practical piece I'll just turn off screen sharing, and maybe I'll just pin myself in the middle, and we'll go through some exercises together. And so that means if you've got a piece of paper handy, or if you want to use a Word document or anything on your phone, whatever you want, whatever would be helpful to you, I'm going to have you writing some things down and responding to some prompts. Again, totally optional, but I think with that level of personal participation, the insights that we're talking about in the theoretical part of class will become more visceral. They'll become more meaningful to you. Okay. All right. Patty, does this sound like a plan? Good to see you, Patty. All right. So here we are, off and running. I'd like to say just a little bit more, if I could, just about the assumption that I'm using in this class of the sort of the solvency of systems theory. And I want to explain more what I mean by that, because I think this theory is helpful in understanding what's happening in AI, in ChatGPT. But I think it's also helpful for just talking about how technology in the current sort of era or epoch has really changed what I call the summum bonum, or the telos of society. So it used to be in the ancient Greek world that the goal of being in the world was poiesis or phusis, so nature or poiesis. And what this had to do with was, this is Plato and Aristotle, and what their focus was, to the individual in their writings philosophically was that we, with this human experience, really should be demonstrating our essential self, our best self, just like a fruit that ripens on the vine. We want to present ourselves as ripened fruit. And so part of that is being attentive to our emotional management of feelings and affect. Part of it's being cognitively and intellectually informed. Part of it is personal, moral, and voting properly, or at least in accordance with one's values. There's a personal, moral piece to this. So anyway, so the Greeks have this emphasis on essence and bringing out one's best essence. And Jesus, frankly, borrows some of this when we start talking about the soul, the ideology or immortality ideology of the soul. Because Plato actually is one of the first to assert that there is something that of non-corporeal continuity, we call it. There is something that continues on after death. And for Plato, that was the soul, and Jesus picked up on that and used that and wove that into part of the New Testament theology, because the people at his time knew of this concept of soul. But anyway, so the Greek epoch transitions into the Roman epoch. And the Roman goal for being in the world wasn't to ripen, wasn't to be our best self. It was to assert power and dominion. In Roman thinking, life doesn't provide essence. In fact, life actually is like mud. There's no essence in mud. You grab hold of it and you shape it into, let's say, a brick. And then you take this brick and you set it outside another brick, and you build a road with it. And then you build a bridge, and then you build a castle. And then you administer the inhabitants in that brick. And there's no essence to be teased out. In fact, it's just for the people who are in control to demonstrate their being better than the average person by tamping down the crowds, administering an empire, and exerting dominion. So those who were living life to the fullest were those who were exerting themselves and exhibiting power. Now, it's a big difference between the Roman and the Greek epoch. But stay with me here for a second. Because after the Roman epoch is the Christian epoch. So now we're talking about 4th century AD, CE, if you'd like. And so we're talking about God now, the Christian God, replacing the Roman emperor. So it's not the emperor that puts dominion or control over all of the external world. No, God as Father has done that already. And so we, as people during the Middle Ages in the West, we were taught that the best thing that we could do was to obey the ritual and moral laws of God and to maintain that relationship, which is what God intends. And so bakers do what bakers do, kings do what kings do, and you don't really have to reflect so much about these ideas of ripening or asserting power, because that's all been sort of done for us in the background. God's taken care of everything. So our job is to live in accordance with the laws. And so that way of thinking about what's most important is yet again very, very different than what we saw in the Roman and in before that, the Greek era. After Christianity is modernism. So modernism in the West, we typically date from the 15th century to the 20th century. And the goal of modernism, the goal of being in the world, was to use reason to solve problems. So there was tremendous optimism in the intellectual capacity of the human mind and the drive of the human spirit. And it was part of this ethos that gave rise to our Constitution and our founding of the United States. That unbridled optimism that if we just stay together as a community of inquiry and use reason and filter out emotion, filter out religion, and stay rational, we can uncover the mysteries of why everything happens the way that it does. In fact, the metaphor, of course, of modernism is that of the old trusty pocket watch. The pocket watch that is being increasingly replaced by Apple Watches, but I still carry my pocket watch. And if you flip open the back of that pocket watch, what do you see? All the gears, all the levers. So the intrepid, dutiful, committed, scientific, rational mind, if they stay with this thing called life and they stay analyzing, they will get deeper and deeper insight into the back of that watch, which God has, if you were a Christian during that time, the belief was that God had set it up that way and then just left the world sort of parked, and it was just sort of doing its own thing. God didn't need to intervene anymore because the watch is already off and going, and we're living in that universe, that watch universe. And so that was the goal. So 4 epochs I've just gone through in 5 minutes. This is a kind of summary of Western philosophy in about 5 minutes. But this is all just prolegomena, so I can say just one thing about the contemporary epoch. The contemporary epoch, the epoch that we're in now, we call the postmodern epoch. We also call it, some of us, the technological epoch. The technological epoch is the epoch, is our epoch, and it's very different, yet still from the 4 that preceded us. In this epoch, I argue that rather than asking what our essence is or trying to ripen or find out God or trust reason or any of those things, the goal of a lot of our professional activities, at least in this country, seem to be around making things efficient. Technology, after all, is almost always sold as a labor-saving device. So, I'll just confess I'm a single father of twin girls, and they're 11 years old. So you can do the math on where they're at developmentally. And so they live with me here in the Haight-Ashbury. And one of the things that being a father has reinforced to me, A, is how wrong I had it about the nature-nurture debate. Oh my goodness. Trained as a philosopher early on, and then later as a psychologist. Oh my goodness, can you imagine? I was so all about nurture. I used to say, we're always already social, we're always already political beings. There's no even way to glimpse pure nature. So nurture, nurture, nurture. Where did you go to school? How were you treated? But when I had twin girls, oh wow. So that's when my eyes really were open to the profound power of nature. And as it turns out, parenting for me has been a lot like trying to keep a car going very fast down a road in between the lanes. Whereas before, I thought I was going to be shoveling the coal in this train that was going to be on one track, and I was going to just be filling it up with all of the wisdom of the ages and all of the best sorts of motivational principles and respect for one's dads and so on and so forth, all the key insights that any 11-year-old girl needs. So no, it wasn't like that at all. So it's been just hanging on by the seat of my pants, just trying to stay up with what was this natural interest, this natural personality, which is very reminiscent of me in some ways, and their biological mother in some ways too. So nature and nurture, wow. So here's the point though. So this last weekend, I like to cook like some of you, and I like to make pizza. But you know, if you really want to make pizza, goodness gracious, I mean, we're talking 3 or 4 hours. You know, you got to get the dough and roll out the dough and all the stuff. So when my kids were home over the weekend, what did I do? They said, Dad, are you going to make pizza? I said, hon, it's 7 o'clock. We need to eat. I'm just going to put in this frozen pizza, a DiGiorno, in the oven, and we'll be ready to eat in 20 minutes. And they said, okay, Dad, that's okay. And I said, I'm so sorry. I really wanted to, but I just don't have time to make the good pizza. And they said, and this is great. They said, oh, that's fine. It's not as good as yours, but it's good enough. And see, that is what technology sometimes does to us. It seduces us, because why in the world would anybody spend 4 or 5 hours rolling out the dough to make a pizza that's great when you could have a pretty good pizza, maybe not as good, but pretty darn good, in 30 seconds or less? So one of the challenges or dangers of technology, look, no one's complaining about the incredible ways in which our lives have become easier as a result of tech. But one of the challenges of technology is that it can seduce us into settling for a kind of diminished value or diminished version of experience. So what do I mean? I'll put my cards on the table. I shudder sometimes at the phrase 24/7. That's a distinctly postmodern kind of experience. When I grew up, and perhaps when you did too, phones being attached to walls and all, that when that phone rang, imagine Thanksgiving at your house. You know, if you were to get up during the Thanksgiving meal at your house and go over and grab that phone in the kitchen attached to the wall, and you'd call a friend, woo! Your family would have said, Nate, you get your behind back in the seat. And what would they say? They'd say, it's not time for that. It's not time for that. It's Thanksgiving. We got grandma and grandpa here at the table. We got aunts and uncles at the table. You got the nieces and nephews you haven't seen. It's not time. It's not time to get on the phone and call your friend or your girlfriend. That way of thinking is becoming less and less and less common, because of, in part, the way in which we get information and use the internet, which doesn't tell us at 3 a.m, hey, Nate, you shouldn't be typing Google, you should be sleeping. No, it's just going to give me the search results. And so 24/7 is the great sort of breakthrough, that it really, the idea that anything can happen at any time, and that there really need not be necessarily a sacrosanct time, but rather time is something that's infinitely replaceable. And you kind of have to think that way if you're really going to be a good systems thinker, because systems thought, in the drive to make things efficient and to really try and get things organized, you know, like an aisle at Walmart, or like an aisle at Amazon when you're shopping online, or an aisle that you would walk down at Target, where everything is in its place. And the barcodes and the prices and all of the marketing collateral, it's all, it's not very chaotic. It's very sort of laid out, you know. And so we, with technology, are kind of doing that with all data, organizing it, you know. So we got, you know, Hinerman's website, and we got Linda's website. And then if you want to read about, you know, Jean-Paul Sartre, the philosopher, there's websites dedicated to him, and everything's got its own sort of place. And behind the scenes, in the actual code that creates all of this stuff that we call, there's tremendous efficiency. It's all about efficient connections. So I like efficiency, and I'm not complaining, but I am observing, though, that we are being offered a seductive replacement with technology to some fundamental tasks of living that we used to see in a much different way. Let me make one last point on this. So, you've heard this, but I can confirm it. Students these days don't, and not to fault them, but they don't write as well as previous generations in a typical academic sense. In part, well, there's a lot of reasons for this, but one big reason is that it's just not practiced in the same way. When you and I were growing up, writing essays and getting feedback on essays was a disproportionate, or maybe even the lion's share of our feedback. In fact, it wasn't until I was in college that we even had Scantron. So everything used to be written, and now the pendulum is completely swung the other way. So students are very routinized around sending a text to communicate, sometimes even really important information that many of us would have been raised or trained to think should only come from an in-person dialogue. Let's talk. There's something important I need to tell you. Because of the imminent sort of replaceability of time, that impacts written communication. Because just like, you could Google something at 3 a.m, or just like a Thanksgiving table nowadays, where everybody's on their phone, grandmas and grandpas, aunts and uncles, nieces and nephews. And I'm dressing this up. I'm saying some generalizations here, so forgive me. But I'm just saying that there is a way in which even Thanksgiving, and my kids have told me, they've said, we're even noticing that Christmas just kind of feels like any other day, because we could just do anything we want, can't we? I mean, what differentiates this day versus another day, is the question that they ask. And so in this way, we are focused on this systems theory of organizing, making things efficient. But then the philosopher, and forgive me, I think can fairly ask, to what end? To what end all these apps on the phone, on our computer, making things easier, quicker, more efficient? But to what end do we use those tools? Now, I don't have an answer for that exactly, but the question itself is, I think, important to acknowledge, is not even an efficient question. When I asked my students, when I first got here, I used to ask my students to write a series of essays for a death and dying class that I still teach about what's most worth living for to them. They could talk about their family, their spirituality, if that's relevant, their job aspirational, family aspirational, whatever. And nowadays, I really can't assign that anymore, because after about 10 years of assigning that, my students started to say to me, what do you expect us to say? And I said, whatever is true. And they said, well, but how are you going to write a rubric and grade that? There's no wrong answer for that, Nate. I mean, whatever I'm living for, that's for me to decide. How would you even grade that? And I said, well, you got to think of grading and assessments as a learning opportunity. I'm not so much looking to take points away, but I just want you to have the experience of thinking through and trying to identify, to call forward what's most important to you. And folks really drug their feet, and they said, I just don't even know what to think about that, Nate. I mean, I'm so busy and I just don't see any practical application to that question. And again, how are you going to grade that? So I just gave it up. So this is what I'd like to make in terms of a profound, perhaps exaggerated inference from that assignment, is that when we stop and try to check in with one another, even to ask how someone is doing in a clinical sense, so you go to the doctor or you come to the psychotherapist, the average medical interview in the US is under 3 minutes. I mean, the average interchange between you and a doctor is 3 minutes. So could you imagine, and we'll talk about in another class, healthcare literacy, but you know what it's like to go in and have an audience with the physician. You've got anxiety, you've got some questions, you've probably got some concerns. And when you go in, you often are handed a tremendous sort of specialized language set, a lot of medical nomenclature, some of which you may not even know or understand, or at least I don't. And so often we leave even the most crucial interactions, that with our doctors, with questions. And we think, I don't know exactly what all's going on, but I'll trust that this is what we should be doing or what I should be doing. And in part, the reason that those interviews or those experiences in clinic are so fast is because the drive for efficiency, even on hospital floors, is so intense in order to save money and to elevate the bottom line that we've got everybody absolutely running like crazy. Sometimes skipping meals, sometimes skipping bathroom breaks, because people's schedules in the hospitals, in our clinics, and our mental health institutions are so overwhelmed that even we who've gone into a helping profession don't even have the time hardly anymore to engage on these deeper levels. I had an occasion this past a couple weekends ago, working with a man who was on hospice, and he says to the hospice nurse, and I was there. He says, "When am I going to be able to drive again?" And she says, nurse says, "You're not going to be able to drive again. Frank, let's call him, you're dying." Now, that may sound as if she was cruelly hitting him over the head with the truth. The reality is he had a very wry sense of humor, and he knew he was dying. I mean, there's no mystery here. But is it really about driving? After the nurse and others left, I returned to, let's call him Frank. And I said, "Frank, where is it that you want to go?" He said, "I'll tell you where I want to go." He said, "Christmas this year is coming up, and I just called to some guy at Macy's on the phone, and I told him what I wanted my kids to get for Christmas, and I want to make sure that they get those gifts, because I don't know that I will be here to ensure this coming Christmas that they get into those hands." So you see, there's what's said, and then there's what's really being said. And if we're so tipping forward in our work worlds, in our personal worlds, always getting to the next thing so that we can get that done, get that back organized, and move on to the next thing, the next email, the next text, the next social media post, whatever it is, it accrues a kind of momentum that even with all of this technology around us, a lot of people, I'm one included, feel even more sort of on tilt than we did prior to technology. So there's a kind of malaise, I think, that some of us feel around the pacing of technology and how it sort of subtly takes previous value propositions and sort of dilutes them a bit in order to make them eminently replaceable or eminently sort of presentable in different contexts, and like systems thinking that you could just sort of pluck one thing out and reinsert it over here as if everything were just sort of cogs in a machine. Let me stop there. We've said a lot, and I'm trying to make some space here to get at systems theory and ways in which it shows up in contemporary culture. What thoughts do you have? I know we're going to take a break here, so that's well deserved, but I just wanted to check in if this was speaking to any of you, or if you feel like I'm being too unfair, perhaps, with the technological era and all of the great sort of advances. Do you sense this? Do you feel more busy, let's say, now in your lives as a result of technology, perhaps, than you did before?
I can make a comment about that, going pretty far back, all the way to the introduction of the fax machine. And I mean, some of what you were saying reminded me of that, because I am old enough to have been practicing law when the fax machine started, essentially. And especially for a profession that is mostly billed hourly and operates on deadlines, it, there a lot of technology is presented as, oh, it's going to help so much, we can communicate faster. And before the fax machine, you had deadlines, you had to send a person to Sacramento to file something, you had to do all sorts of things that took a long time and provided a number of days before you would even get some sort of response. Right. And so suddenly everything becomes compressed. And that seems sort of like one of the earliest steps in 24/7 to me, where things do not always have the effects that we're sort of led to believe or that are touted with something. And it does make me think of systems theory, because so much depends on one thing, and suddenly all sorts of things change.
Yeah, so unintended consequences I'm hearing, and yeah, and so there and all of these shifts. Thank you so much. Linda had your hand raised.
I did have my hand up. Thank you. For me, the technology has been it contributes to my serenity and lack of anxiety, because it's a backup for me. I'm not walking around constantly fearing that I've forgotten something, because my phone will send me a reminder.
That's right.
And very much like the previous speaker, whose name I did not catch regrettably, I was a lawyer before there were fax machines and before there was any word processing equipment. And you had to type things on 5 sheets of carbon paper with an IBM Selectric that had 1 character backspace. And it was very unforgiving. There was no way to collaborate with anyone, to catch you by the heels if you were falling out of the window. I find all this to be miraculous and calming. And I don't think it's necessary to constantly be scattered just because it's out there and you can look at anything at any time.
Yes. Thank you. That's right. Sandy.
Yes. I remember when whiteout was the big technological invention and so wonderful. And I really appreciate the phone and all of the technologies, but I am fed by anxiety that I'm not keeping up. My Duolingo, if I don't do it, the hammering of the different must-dos. So I wondered about taking this class because I didn't know how you could have dialogue in a Zoom, but you're doing it really well.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's really remarkable. But I find that it's so helpful, but it's also so unstabilizing to me. So that's all.
Yes. Thank you. So we're going to take a break here. And so what I'd like to do is I'd like to ask you a question and you think about it during the break. And when we come back, you can tell me. So this is sort of like one of those books. When we were growing up, we used to call them choose your own adventure books. You remember those? So I'm going to give you a choice. You can guide me. So this morning so far, this afternoon, we've been talking a little bit about the technological era. And we've been talking about this notion of technology and the role of being efficient. So I can stay on this and we can do one more lap and get a little deeper grade of clarity on the implications of this when we come back, or we can pivot to an exercise around psychology. And we can pivot to a way of trying to understand the ways in which you perceive your role in contemporary culture. And we will do this. Whether we do it today, though, or next week is up to you. So I'm going to let you choose. You want to do something applied, where I'm asking you some questions, it's getting you into your own psychological history, or we can do a little bit of a deeper dive with the last 40 minutes that we've got and really tease out the implications of these changes in worlds, really. That, 2,000 years ago, we're in a much different place in terms of what it even means to be at all. Before we even ask the doing question, why are we being? What does it mean to be? Plato, Roman, Christian, modern eras had different responses to what it means to be, so we could explore them. So I'm going to be ready to go in either direction as soon as we come back from the break, and we'll take a vote, and whatever you all vote, so be it. Amen. We will proceed. Sound good? So how long do you all like for a break? 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 5 minutes?
10 is typical.
Okay. All right. So Linda's given me the 5. So let's do 7 minutes. And Patty is our timekeeper. No, it's okay. I'll be the timekeeper. So much love. Enjoy 7 minutes, and then we'll return as soon as folks are back.
Okay. That's good. Now, what about me? Nancy, I have to have a video. I don't have a picture. Nancy. I don't know, hide video. Okay. So I think that's time.
Okay. Good to see you again, Patty. I loved your note. Thank you. That's so exciting. Oh, sorry, Sandy's note. Sandy's note. That's so exciting, Sandy. All right, my friends. So what should we do? Would you like to go deep dive, or should we pivot a bit and try and do something applied?
So now you don't say, hi, the in-person folks are voting for option B.
Okay.
And, yeah,
Oh, okay. How many in-person folks are there?
5.
Okay. I could come up and sit with you all one of these
So,
Tuesdays.
so I think the
We
vote
would
was,
love it.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah, the vote
Okay.
was 4-1 or something. Yeah, I
Okay.
think that was, I mean, 4 Bs, 1A, I think. Yeah.
Got it. So here's the thing. Here's what we'll do. Got it, Linda. Thank you. So we're going to do we're not going to do the deep dive. We're going to do the reflection. But what I will say though, Sandy, though, I will, right after this class is over, I'm going to send you a little clip of a documentary that I was a part of many years ago on this topic. And it basically is a film version of just what I said just now. And the film is called Being in the World. And it's a philosophical documentary that we got some attention at Cannes, or I don't know, do we say Cannes? I don't know, Cannes Film Festival. And so this is on YouTube, and I will put that in the chat right now. And that film is a deep dive on all of what I just sort of went over in 10 or 15 minutes. And so I would call your attention to that. Wonderful. Okay, so the takeaway point is that I'm wanting us to think about systems theory and to do so seriously. And so that sets up then the first psychological intervention or tool that we're going to look at in this class. So if you would, take out a piece of paper or a Word document or anything, phone, whatever. Now, I want to read something to you, and I want, if you would, let this description of a family wash over you and see if you can track the systems theory that's involved in the description of this family. Okay, so you're, based on what we talked about in the first part of class, see if you can pick up where the systems thinking or the systems theory shows up in this anecdote here. So this is just a story to emphasize the systems theory in an applied setting. So I've changed the names to protect the innocent. 3 weeks ago, Kim observed that John, her husband, was increasingly distant in their relationship. When they're together, John does not behave in his typically spontaneous and attentive manner. He doesn't talk as much as he did usually, and he seems to be preoccupied with other things. Although John is actually struggling with a problem at the office, which he doesn't want to discuss, Kim assumes that his distancing is evidence that he's losing interest in their marriage, a presumption that escalates her anxiety. As a result, Kim is having increasing trouble sleeping, concentrating on her work, or even finishing a meal. She repeatedly badgers John to talk about the issue during their evening hours together at home, but John resists the pressure to talk and gets irritated by Kim's barrage of questions. He expresses his anger in brief, caustic remarks before withdrawing into brooding silence, a tactic that even heightens more Kim's anxiety, convincing her that he really has lost interest in the marriage. In turn, this galvanizes Kim's desire to question John even more intensely. Unable to settle the issue with John, Kim spends hours venting her fears to her younger sister, who lives with them. The sister sides with Kim, and she snubs John when he's around out of loyalty to Kim. John, unaware that he's done anything to offend his sister-in-law, feels hurt by her rejection, and so withdraws even more. This process continues day after day. Kim, John, and Kim's sisters seem to be trapped in a kind of chronic impasse that no one knows how to resolve. So I'm arguing that this, from my practice, this little story, is a good example of how systems theory shows up in real life. So let me stop talking and give you a chance. What do you think the systems theory implications are in that little vignette? Okay, let me ask a better question then. Let's assume that since systems theory says no one's behavior stands alone, everyone's behavior is a response to someone else's action. What is an example of that tenet in the story that I just told? Hi, Patty.
Seems like we've at least got a dynamic where Kim is insecure about the relationship. And that's at least feeding into the unproductive dynamic going on between her and John.
Good, yeah. So Kim is worried. She's interpreting John's behaviors to be of one sort with one goal, but as it turns out, in John's head, that's not the reason. And then Kim's sister comes along and she is on Kim's side. And so John actually feels shunned by Kim's sister. So how would it be then that every person's behavior in this case can really be understood only within the context of another person's behavior?
Well, you would start, I mean, there's this system of the three people living together, but the whole premise of what's affected that system is John's work. So you have a whole separate, not entirely separate, but a different system that's impacting John, which he brings into his living system, so to speak, where the other people in his living system are not aware of what that system is doing, and it's having a profound impact on his living system.
Yes, perfectly said. Perfect. Margaret, were you going to say something in addition to Rob?
Well, it appears that none of the three of them are in the habit of expressing to each other what their personal feelings are.
That's right.
Trusting each other that the other will receive it properly.
Yes, beautiful. Sandy, you agree with all that? Yes. So one of the things about being oh, Linda, did you want to say something? You're muted though.
Yeah. So it feels to me as if none of these people trust is, I guess, at the base of it, trust each other enough to respect each other's boundaries. You know, Kim, because of her own insecurity, can't respect John's need to process his work problems in his own head first. And then she also can't respect the privacy of their marriage enough to avoid going to her sister with the problems. And then the sister can't avoid judging and taking sides. And it feels like it's an inappropriate alliance.
Yeah. So, you know, as we're observing different features of the anecdote here, there are a variety of ways we can interpret this. We could interpret this around boundaries. We could interpret this around the collision of systems. So as Rob said, work systems bumping up into family systems. And while he's trying to filter out the work stuff, it seeps through. Just like any good parent knows, when you come home and you have 6-year-olds greeting you, they know better how you feel in that moment than you do about your own situation because they are reading affect. They're absorbing affect. This is what this is how they survive in the early days, pre-linguistically. So to be able to read the meta communication right when mom or dad walks in the house, they're able to do it in a way that we as adults kind of dull ourselves to as we continue to go on in life, because we've got so many different relationships in terms of being of help. It's not always helpful for us to be reading meta communications in people that we don't know. But for kids, it's essential. And so we know that we can not be good at keeping things to ourselves. So John is thinking, I'll just keep this to myself and work this out. But his wife, she knows him better than he knows himself in some ways, and she interprets his being disconnected from her as being her fault, and then goes to her sister perhaps for consultation or for support or whatever it is. So there's all sorts of ways we could look at this, and my goal, of course, is not to identify who's at fault. That's not the point. The point is just to observe that there are these different experiences that we might say individuals are having, but the individuals themselves are very much responding to things way outside, forces way outside, behaviors way outside of themselves, even though they think that what their behavior really is responding to is something local, something quite specific. So, for example, John's frustration around Kim's sister, he thinks is a result of Kim's sister, but we know that Kim's sister's only acting like that because Kim told her something, and that Kim's feeling is coming from John and John's work. And so here we go. And so what we talk about in systems theory more than cause and effect, here's the point. We talk about circular cause. So what tends to happen is that in systems, we accumulate patterns of thinking, patterns of feeling, patterns of behavior. Most of what psychology does is try and get at what those patterns are. Why? Well, the idea is that if we're able to get at the patterns that guide decision-making, we'll have some, and here's the key word, freedom in the moment to perhaps make a decision that's different than what the pattern would have called for. It doesn't mean we undo the pattern. It means that we want to have freedom in a particular moment to choose alternatively. And the psychodynamic school of psychology says, this is their thesis here, the psychodynamic school, says we have within us competing drives, competing goals. And as we try to achieve our internal goals, we rub up against habits that we've brought with us that have gotten us to where we are, coping strategies included, with situations in our lives that wouldn't benefit from us demonstrating our pattern behavior in the same way. That is to say, we have to change. We have to tune into new situations. We have to know new people. We have to encounter diverse episodes and so on, stimuli that thrusts us back on ourselves in a way such that we can say, do I want to exhibit the same pattern of feeling, or is this an opportunity for me to do something different? How many of you in your lives have dated the same person before? I mean, the same person before. And you think, wow, how did that happen? What is going on there? So we tune into patterns, people, styles, personalities. We tune into certain codependencies, if that's our ballywick. We tune into certain types of suffering, certain types of identifying with others. And when we do that, and this is natural, none of this is pathological, this is how we operate, and it's good that we operate like this, but what systems theory wants to say is that we get so routinized in adapting to the systems that we move in and out of that sometimes we sacrifice our freedom and able to be clear in our thinking and seeing that this situation is really an opportunity to be different if we so choose. So let me say it more clearly, and I'll put it in the chat, actually. So the psychodynamic approach to distress, or the psychodynamic approach to psychology, has basically three parts. The psychodynamic school wants to say that our distress, our suffering in life really comes from having goal conflicts. We want this and we want that, and that we can't have both. So what this school of psychology tries to do is to get us thinking in new and creative ways so that we can pivot. And so psychodynamic therapy involves three stages. One is, what are you willing to change? Are you willing to change where you live, what you do for work, your life world, your professional world, or maybe you've just got a willingness to change some part of your life, something small, like I'm going to quit smoking, or I'm going to drink less, or I'm going to exercise more, or hike every Saturday, or whatever it is. So, but some willingness to change has to be present. I have to be willing to give up some part of how I normally approach life in lieu of another possibility. And you'll only get as much behavior change from that individual, that patient, as he or she is willing to give up to change. So willingness to change is step one. Step two then is insight. So everybody comes to therapy, usually everybody comes wanting behavior change. So whether it's couples or family, like the ones that I've discussed with you so far, telling my teenage son he needs to stop doing this and start doing that. And when he does that, everything will be peaches and cream. Of course, we know that's not true. But this idea that, that we insight into the nature of the habit is essential in order to really foster durable behavior change. If you don't have insight into the nature of what you're behaving against or reacting to, if you don't have insight into the nature of the system that you're inhabiting at a particular time, then what the psychodynamic school insists is that you're almost doomed to repeat the same types of patterns of thinking, feeling, and thus behaving. So insight. What is insight? Well, I'll tell you what it's not in this case. So if those of you who have served in the armed forces, what boot camp was like, and you could imagine, those of you who haven't, what a drill sergeant might be doing to folks who are newly minted, let's say, in the armed forces. And what does the drill sergeant do? Are they philosophers? No, it's do this, you do that, and you do it when I say you do it, and you do it for exactly how long, and you don't talk back out, you just do it. Orders, we call them. Sound like medical orders? No, that's another conversation. But orders, you got to do it, top down. No, you don't need to think, don't need insight, you just do. Well, that works for a time. It works for a time, but most people, even in the service, we don't like it. And it's not necessarily a recipe for ongoing behavior change, but gosh, you sure are probably going to do exactly what the drill sergeant wants in that moment. But after you leave the service and you're back at home, well, that drill sergeant's not standing there anymore. And so now you're left to your own devices. So just demanding someone start behaving differently really doesn't work in the long term. One of my favorite couples phrases that comes out of couples therapy, I hear it almost every couples session in some form or another. It's one person turns to the lover or the dyad partner and they say, honey, I love you. Now please change. And you need to do this and that. I love you. Now change. So this is, we oftentimes encounter situations where we say, if you would just do that the way that I want you to, then things would be better. So insight into the nature of the habits that give rise to certain types of behaviors is really what the psychodynamic school is trying to highlight for us, because just demanding, even of yourself, like a drill sergeant to stop smoking or to get in the gym or to be nicer is not durable. The opposite is also not durable. The opposite, where there are no demands, and that we simply say, almost like a guru might say, well, let's just think about it, or let's just let it be. And so this being and this living with the possibility of this emotion or this response or this behavior, as opposed to having to translate that possibility into a real activity. So most of us, my point is, when we want behavior change, we want real behavior change. We don't want to just imagine possibilities differently, although that's important to do. There needs to be a behavior part. So the example here would be, you say, yeah, Nate, I know I need to work out. And as a matter of fact, I'll tell you for 30 minutes about how I would benefit from working out. So you got the insight, but that doesn't mean you're going to end up in the gym or on the walk or on the bike or on the rowing machine. So insight alone and demanding behavior change on its own, neither one are sufficient. You need both. You need a willingness to change. You need some willingness to entertain insight. And then we've got the fundaments of behavior change, durable behavior change. So with that, let me ask you a question. This first question has you reflecting on certain roles, rules, and scripts that you had growing up in your family system. That's what our focus is going to be. So on this piece of paper or in your phone or wherever, if you would, let's make a column, 2 columns. And on the heading of the first column is just simply name. And then the heading on the second column is just simply role. Role is in like thespians take on a role when they are part of a play. So I'm not talking about the dinner role, I'm talking about the role that you and people that were in your family took up when you were young. Because the sense within the psychodynamic school of psychology is that the habits that guide your thinking and guide your feeling, that conclude in the behaviors that you have as an adult, start in your family system, your family of origin. Even if, like me, you grew up in a house where there were drug addictions and not much cohesion. I never had any rules, really. But I was profoundly influenced still, even by the absence of certain types of relational dynamics, you see. So whether you've got one type of family system or another, it's all powerfully influential. So we don't want to just discount any family system and say, well, I wasn't really that close to my family. No, that's important to know. So here's the thing, in that column, that first column where you have name, put your name, and then put the names of the people that lived in your house when you grew up. Now, there's no wrong answers to this. So your situation may not fit perfectly in a nice little box. That's okay. But what I'm after here would be you writing your name, the names of any siblings, the names of your parents. Now, some of you are going to say, but I had a mixed family here. So my parents got divorced and remarried, and so I lived with one another. Look, you're your own best judge. If you want to put, while you were growing up, I'm talking about 21 and younger, if you want to put step parents that you were close to in there or step siblings, please be my guest, but you don't have to. The idea is these are people that you grew up that were in your family system and with whom you had interactions, if not daily, every other day or so. So you're just going to write their name. We're just trying to catalog the names. You may have 3 names, you may have 7 names. You probably don't have more than 7 unless, well, you're Irish Catholic in your roots like me, and maybe there's 12 more, but I don't know. You put down whoever you think. And then when you're done with that, I'm going to read you some descriptions of archetypal family roles. And the idea is that you're going to see if you can't match a role with one of the people on your list. And what we're going to soon see is that the types of roles that exist in your family and the way that they interacted is your family system. And that sets forth a kind of momentum for the kinds of habit taking emotionally and cognitively that you have as an adult. So we're actually going to see a little bit about your own formation in relation to other types of roles. And we're going to learn a tremendous amount of them. Now, we may not get to every single insight here today because we've only got 15 minutes left, but we'll get started. Okay. So do we got names? All right. Okay. So I'm going to describe to you the first role. And here's the deal. This role that I describe may not apply to anyone on your list. That's okay. Not every role will be represented. On the other hand, I might read a role description and you might say, I think this applies to 2 people. No problem. You absolutely want to try and suss out what role applies to you. Of course, after all, this is about getting insight into your experience of being in your family system. If we did your sister or your brother, theirs would be different, slightly. So this is your subjective perception of the roles that people took up in the family and what role you had in the family, okay? All right, so the role title of the first one is called the caretaker, okay? Now let me describe it, and then as I'm describing it, you're reading over the names on your list and you're seeing who had that, if anybody had that role. The family caretaker, as the name implies, cares for the needs of the family members, and this role is frequently assigned to a parent. Usually the person that is assigned this role is the designated caregiver for the children. So caretakers perform a variety of tasks, which can include anything from, cooking a meal to bandaging the proverbial skin knee. And their tasks also include, all the doctor's appointments and the dental appointments and the soccer games and the music lessons and picking up the dirty clothes on the floor and all that stuff. Maybe it's listening to the groans of how awful life is for the teenager at the house, or why it's not fair that they can't stay out later on prom night. There really is no end to what caretakers are willing to do for their family. Now, there's a lot that could be said, but let me acknowledge 2 pieces. One is that in dysfunctional families, I'm introducing a new term, functional and dysfunctional. In dysfunctional families, caretakers actually often emerge as enablers, not by intent, but just because of the nature of the dysfunction. So what that means, if a family member, for example, has an addiction or some other type of, let's say, mental health disorder, caretakers sometimes, again, not with intent, but sort of unconsciously, enable the person to maintain their dysfunctionality by assuming that either that person isn't responsible for change, or that they can't change, or that it's not fair to them to change, or perhaps the caretaker in this case is worried that the change may have implications that are unintended, like Rob mentioned earlier. A good example of that would be, I've had over the years, I've worked in many different dependency interventions, even with my own family when I was young. And so when you do an intervention for someone who has an addiction, you tend to want to have a clear plan and a clear ask and a clearly supported decision that can be made by the person in that moment. So, many times the person who has the addiction, after it's been treated, and sometimes even when it's in remission, when they come back home, now they've got all this emotional bandwidth freed up. They're emotionally labile. They have interest in the kids or in the spouse, maybe more than they demonstrated to be before. And so while the family goal, and especially that of the caretaker, had been, let's just say, dear old dad needs to get his drinking under control. Well, when dad comes home sober, the family system isn't built for the sober version of dad. It's built for the alcoholic version. So when dad comes home, even though he's healthy and has done something that everyone has asked him to do, he's not acting the same. And what this does is tantamount to you growing up as a flamenco dancer, and you got a huge performance, and you show up and the conductor says, you know what, Sandy, we made a slight change in the program and we're going to do all breakdancing today. And you go, what? I haven't been practicing that. Have you ever been in a play and someone starts going off script? You know how uncomfortable that is, right? I mean, unless you went to the Groundlings and you're a master of just sort of comedy that's free flow formed. I mean, so when dad gets sober, he's now gone off script. The family system has been built with his dependency already as part of it. So the family system has to pivot in their dance steps. They have to learn a new way of both receiving the behavior that dad is providing and also responding to it. So there's an example of a healthy change in a family system that actually can cause distress for a time. Why that is so important is that family systems have a homeostatic feedback mechanism in them. So the feelings that you had growing up, the feelings that were illicit to demonstrate, weren't the same in other families. And you grew up with a particular kind of emotional range or spectrum. Some feelings were allowed to express, some were not. The ones that were not, you probably just swallowed and used your good minds to figure out another way to manage. And other feelings you might have sat in and stewed in. And again, to a certain extent, your family system tolerated those. But what those feelings were, and to the extent to which they were tolerated, is rather unique to your system. Not exclusively unique, but like an example would be. So you're learning some things about me. So one of the aspects of living in my family system growing up, given all of the drug abuse, was that depression and anxiety were ubiquitous. Pouting, being sad, stuck on a couch or outside was normal. What was not part of our homeostatic feedback loop was anger. No anger in my house. If you got angry, that was met with this. Dad said, no, we don't raise our voice. Now dad could, but it was almost always explosive and negative. So as an adult, can you guess? I have total clearance and permission in my deep family system training to be depressed. But being mad is not something, you can talk to all of the people I've dated in the past and all my friends, and they'd say, oh, Nate, he's not very angry. Does that mean I'm not ever angry? No, I get angry, but it gets converted very quickly into something else, something around which I feel guilty about, or I want to change, or maybe it's an effort to seek approval. Now, I'm a therapist, and so I've had the luxury and the privilege of studying myself over time, so I'm not enslaved to the family system responses of youth. But until I got insight into the nature of that pattern, particularly around anger, I was very frustrated in my attempts to be assertive in situations where I was indeed angry. It felt very charged to me. It felt out of control, situations where someone was angry. So smash cut to the person that was my neighbor and best friend that I grew up with. His parents, both physicians, which was uncommon in my little Appalachian trailer park county, really, in eastern Kentucky, where I grew up. So at Mike's house, they screamed at the top of their lungs and F-bombs galore. Things that could never be said or thought at my house, but they were commonplace at Mike's. You know what wasn't commonplace? Depression, sadness, and sitting in the basement pouting. If Mike on a summer day was in his living room pouting or sitting on the couch, his mom would come in and say, Mike, get off that couch and go mow the lawn if you're going to sit there. And Mike would say, I already mowed the lawn. And she'd say, then you go over there and you mow Linda's lawn. But what you won't do is sit right here and waste this day. You see, so in our parenting style, in the way in which we were parented, we all have a version of of what we were sort of led to accept as the fair range of emotional regulation in our household. And by the way, it doesn't mean it was healthy. It was what was natural and normal for that system, but it doesn't mean that it was healthy. It's what we all were used to. It's the bathrobe that you never want to throw away, even though it's ratty as all get out, because it just feels normal. It's part of you. So this is the way in which we're inaugurated in family systems. And what I always say to people coming in for therapy in their first session, I always say the hardest part about psychotherapy and healing one's mental health is not to collapse one's mood state, particularly as a child, with the perceived sense of who I am right now as an adult. How you feel and how you felt is not who you are. Emotions are data. Emotions don't have to be action items. Emotions are often irrational. Emotions sometimes are outside of consciousness. Emotions sometimes give rise to thoughts, but the opposite can also be true. Thoughts can guide emotions. So we really get patterned into early on a kind of sequence, a range of what's permissible to feel and demonstrate with the people that we have to live with. And we take that with us when we go to school, and we expect some version of that to transact in our relationships at school, on our sports teams, on our first job. When you have your first date, there's a version of you that kind of expects their family or them to have a similar emotional range or displays a display of behavior around certain emotions. And if they don't, often you correct them. You say, wait, that's not how it goes. But why would you say that? Well, you're saying it because in your family system, that's how it had to be. Can you think outside of your family system? Sure, but it's hard. It takes usually a kind of stutter step and a kind of insistence that we grab an insight to moor us so that we're just not moving from one sea of experience into the next sea of experience, just sort of going through the motions, being myself. But what that really is carrying with me this kind of emotional regulation that comes from early childhood. Now, of course, it can be changed, but my point is just that it's that type of recognition of the early system that we grew up in and with that is the insight that's so crucial as an adult to have, because it doesn't just disappear. It could be put into remission if it needs to be, but it doesn't just go away on its own. It actually becomes more of what it was without insight. You get, people say to me, how many people, Nate, that you work with at the end of life, change big time at the end of life, atheists grabbing a hold of theism, or theism, or religious folks abandoning religious projects in lieu of the diagnosis, or people who all of a sudden, start acting in a way that's really, really dramatically different than how they've always lived their life. And I say, no, actually, I very rarely, if ever, see that, and Rob can back me up if he's seen that. It's almost always the opposite. People become more of themselves as they age. Well, what was the initial self? Your child self. So getting a hold of the family system properties and who was doing what role and what that felt like is usually what gets more and more and more and more of what is as we age. So it's 2:40, and my yammering has made it such that we haven't even started this really cool exercise. So what I think I might do is write up the instructions for this exercise and send those to you. Now, I also know, I've been told at least, that folks don't like homework as much. So I don't want to give homework to everybody and expect everybody to do it. But what maybe I'll do, just like I did with this Being in the World video, I'm happy to make materials available. And now that I've got one class under my belt here with all of us, I think I have a better sense of how we can get much more sort of interactive next week. So you were kind in letting me do the syllabus and doing all of this sort of prolegomena and prefacing. But next week, I think we're going to let me get more directive and applied with you so we have more back and forth and there's less sort of sage on the stage. Is that okay? So one last round. I'm going to write up the instructions of what we would have done if we had more time today. But I promise when we get together next week, we will do this together. I want to do this collectively together. So if you want to get a head start, I'll give you the instructions. Maybe Scott can help me upload those someplace, or I can email you them if you email me. Otherwise, you just have a wonderful week. Think about the books that you want perhaps to get for this class. You don't have to get them. You can always watch the film or you can listen to the audiobooks. I will teach the novels now after talking with you in such a way that you don't have to have read them to get something efficacious from them. Now that's a big lift for me, but I'll try and do it. Okay. So I'm grateful for you, so grateful. I'm excited. I feel very blessed to be part of this. And so I just look forward to seeing you next Tuesday, and I'll get out of your hair. Much love.
Thanks, Professor.
Love you, Rob.